Peter Jennings is Executive Director of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Thanks very much for your time. I want to start on our capability. So if we compare, let's assume it's only 8 nuclear submarines, that's the minimum number, with the 12 we were going to get, the so-called conventional or diesel-powered submarines. How does that overall capability compare in both a defensive and offensive sense?
Tom, I would say that it balances out in favour of the nuclear capability. To the extent that there ever was a strategic rationale behind 12, it was that we needed 12 conventional submarines to give us a guarantee of having 1 to 2 deployed far forward into an area of operations, thousands of kilometres away from Australia. And then if you imagine that you want those 2 submarines there continuously, you will have some in transit going up to the area of operations, you'll have some coming back from the area of operations, and others in maintenance here in Australia. So 12 gave you 2 with conventional capabilities. With nuclear propulsion, you could basically have as many submarines in the water deployed forward as were available. Because the nuclear propulsion will give them the capacity to be at sea indefinitely. The Virginia-class submarines, which the Americans operate, and is one of the 2 which I guess we're going to be looking at now, their nuclear reactors don't need to be refuelled for 33 years. So the limiting factor on their deployment is the capacity to keep the crew sane and fed underwater. So 8 nuclear is definitely a better buy than 12 conventional.
And what about that capability in the theoretical? You mentioned there no need to refuel for 33 years and the lived experience, if you like. Have we seen in these types of subs that can go for so long with a nuclear reactor that they haven't needed to go back for more maintenance than expected? Are we going to rely a lot on the US because we don't have a civil nuclear industry, that any issue with the fuel source, it has to go all the way to the US and have a very costly and lengthy fix?
That shouldn't be the case, Tom. This is a known technology. We're really talking about 60s technology for nuclear propulsion in submarines. That should probably be one of the most stable parts of the boat. So I don't imagine that there would be a requirement to be constantly going back to the US for maintenance.
So the size of our coastline, though, a lot of broad perceptions might be, OK, we've got these state-of-the-art nuclear subs, that's a big part of our defence. It's such a huge coastline, this is a long way from job done on defence. Is the really big conversation here actually about missiles in terms of Australia being able to defend itself? I know this is already part of the agreement and being spoken about, what we might access as part of the agreement.
Well, any sensible Australian defence strategy is going to want to push our forces as far forward as we can get them in order to prevent the idea of having to fight in Australia's nearer approaches, say, south of the Indonesian archipelago. So we need missiles with range on ships and aircraft, which themselves have significant range and are far forward from Australia's own locations. That's the best approach. What we're seeing in the region, Tom, is a move to missiles. That's how China is arming itself. And those missiles do have extended range. So in order to be able to deal with that, we need to be moving into this field ourselves. And that's clearly been a focus of the government's attention for a couple of years now, and indeed at the Osmond discussions in Washington overnight.
Is it possible for Australia's overall defence posture, weaponry and so on, to be able to get to a point where we can have enough deterrent for a major player such as China to ever try to attack Australia without the US coming to our aid and without resorting to nuclear weapons? Is it possible for our sort of economy and size to get to that point?
Yes, but with greater effort than we've been used to making. We can certainly raise the cost substantially on any adversary that might be wanting to come and do damage to Australia. And I think we can raise it to the point that, in fact, the sensible conclusion that an adversary would have is that it's best not to attack us. And that should be the design of the Australian Defence Forces, to provide that. Now, of course, it shouldn't be something that we think about independent of that alliance with the United States, because it's that alliance which is the ultimate deterrent, frankly, in terms of any adversary's intent on doing damage to us. But within that frame, we shouldn't just be relying on the Americans. We need to be doing this ourselves. I think for Australia's purposes, Tom, the idea of achieving that with 2% of the gross national product of our economy being spent on defence, that's not going to work. But we can probably start to have that conversation if we have, 3 or 4% of gross national product being spent on defence. I think the government knows that, and I think it's kind of sidling up towards that proposition as its new understanding of what we need for our defence.
It sounds like it. Interesting times given the call on the budget and the debt. Couple of very quick ones. Is there a danger that we're tying ourselves so closely to the US? We just had the wild ride with Donald Trump. Would another capricious president put all of this in some doubt?
Well, presidents come and go. The relationship we have is with the United States, and that stays. And is there a form of dependence there? You bet. That's always been the case. It was the case in the past. And unless we want to turn ourselves into North Korea and spend half the economy on defence, there is no alternative.
And just finally and briefly, ballpark figure. I'm not going to hold you to account, depending on how right or wrong you are on this, but the cost of this change, so whatever the French contract costs to break and what it's cost so far, and the cost of these new nuclear subs, what's your best guess, Peter?
It'll be more, Tom. And I've seen figures which suggest 3.5 to 4 billion US for a Virginia-class submarine. But that's just the boat. Then you have to support it and crew it and all those things. So this is going to be a massive expense.
Peter Jennings, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cole.